Every morning at exactly 8:15, an old man walked slowly to the same bus stop. Rain or sunshine, winter or summer, he was always there. He wore the same dark brown coat, carried a small black umbrella, and held a folded newspaper beneath his arm. And every morning, he sat on the same wooden bench. He never got on the bus. Not once. For 3 years. The people of the small English town had watched him. Some thought he was waiting for a friend, others believed he had nowhere else to go. A few people even joked that the old man had simply forgotten where he was supposed to be going. But nobody knew the truth. Nobody except the old man. His name was Arthur. He was 78 years old, and every morning, he arrived at the bus stop at exactly 8:15, one cold Monday morning. A young woman named Emily noticed him for the first time. She had recently moved into the town and took the same bus to work every day. As she stood beside the bench, she glanced at the old man. "Good morning," she said politely. Arthur looked up. For a moment, he seemed surprised that someone had spoken to him. Then he smiled. "Good morning." The bus arrived. Emily stepped forward, but before getting on, she looked back. Arthur was still sitting there. Watching the bus. Watching everyone get on, watching everyone leave. Emily frowned. "Are you not coming?" Arthur shook his head. "No, dear. Are you waiting for another bus?" The old man smiled subtly. "No." Emily didn't understand. The driver closed the doors. The bus began to move, and as Emily looked through the window, she saw Arthur staring down the road. Not at the bus. But at something far beyond it. That evening, Emily couldn't stop thinking about him. The next morning, Arthur was there again. Same coat. Same bench. Same newspaper. Same time. 8:15. Emily sat beside him. "You're here every morning, aren't you?" Arthur looked at her. "Yes." "Why?" The old man's smile disappeared. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked toward the empty road. "Because someone promised me they would come back." Emily's heart sank. "Who?" Arthur slowly folded his newspaper. "My wife." Emily didn't know what to say. Arthur looked at the road. Again, "She left this town 47 years ago." Emily stared at him. "And you're still waiting for her?" Arthur nodded. "She told me she'd take the bus home." Then the old man looked at the clock. 8:16. His eyes became strangely hopeful. She was always late. Emily looked down the road. And for the first time, she wondered. What had happened 47 years ago. The next morning, Emily arrived at the bus stop earlier than usual. Arthur was already there. He was sitting on the bench, holding his newspaper. "You're early today," Emily said. Arthur smiled. "Perhaps I'm getting impatient." Emily sat beside him. She wanted to ask about his wife, but she was afraid of reopening an old wound. Instead, she asked gently, what was her name? Arthur looked down at his hands. "Margaret." He said the name as if it were still the most beautiful word in the world. "How long were you married?" 6 years. "And then she left?" Arthur nodded. "One morning, we had an argument." Emily waited. Arthur continued. "It was nothing important. At least, I thought it was nothing important." He looked toward the road. "Margaret wanted to move to London. She had found a job there. She wanted me to go with her." "Why didn't you?" Arthur gave a quiet laugh. "Because I was young, stubborn. I had a good job here. I thought London was too far away." He paused. "She told me I was choosing a town over her," Emily said. "Nothing." Arthur's eyes became wet. "I told her." She was being dramatic. The silence between them grew. "What happened next?" Emily asked. "She packed a small suitcase." Arthur looked at the bus road. "She said she was leaving for London. She said she would take the morning bus." "Did you try to stop her?" Arthur closed his eyes. "No." "Why?" "Because I thought she'd come back." The words came out quietly. "Before she left, she said something to me." Arthur's voice trembled. "She said, 'If you really want me, Arthur, you'll come and get me.'" Emily looked at him. "And you didn't?" Arthur shook his head. "I was angry." The old man stared at his hands. "That afternoon, I changed my mind." Emily held her breath. "I went to the bus station." Arthur's eyes filled with tears. "But Margaret wasn't there. She had already left." Arthur shook his head. "No." Emily frowned. "Then where was she?" Arthur looked at her. "That's what I never found out." The bus arrived. People climbed aboard. Arthur didn't move. Emily watched him carefully. "Did you ever see her again?" Arthur slowly shook his head. "Not for 47 years. The bus drove away." Emily looked at the old man. "Then why do you still wait here?" Arthur's answer was barely a whisper. "Because this is where she promised to come back." Emily looked at the empty road, and suddenly, she realized something. Arthur wasn't waiting for a bus. He was waiting for a promise. Weeks passed. Emily began sitting beside Arthur every morning. At first, they spoke about small things. The weather, the newspaper, the town, but slowly, Arthur began telling her about Margaret. She loved gardening. She hated rainy days. She always drank tea with 2 spoons of sugar. And whenever she laughed, she covered her mouth with her hand. Emily started to imagine the woman Arthur had loved. One morning, Emily asked, "Did you ever try to find her?" Arthur nodded. "Of course." "How?" I wrote letters. Did she answer? No. How many did you send? Arthur looked embarrassed. 23. Emily stared at him. 23 letters? Over the years, did you know where she lived? At first, Arthur explained that he had written to an address in London. The first few letters came back, then one day. One didn't. He assumed she had moved. After that, he tried everything. He contacted old friends. He searched through telephone directories. He even traveled to London several times. But Margaret had disappeared, or so he believed. One rainy morning, Emily arrived at the bus stop and found Arthur holding an old photograph. He stared at it silently. Is that Margaret? Arthur nodded. Emily looked at the photograph. A young woman stood beside a river, smiling at the camera. She looked happy. She was beautiful. Emily whispered. Arthur smiled. She still is. Emily looked at him. Arthur's face suddenly became serious. Do you know what the worst part is? What? I spent 47 years believing she left because I wasn't worth staying for. Emily's heart broke. Arthur. I blamed myself. He folded the photograph carefully. Every birthday, every Christmas, every anniversary, he looked toward the road. I kept thinking that one day she'd come back. Emily reached for his hand. Maybe she wanted to. Arthur looked at her. Then why didn't she? Emily didn't have an answer. But that evening, she decided to search for Margaret herself. She had access to old newspaper archives at the local library. She began searching. Dates, names, locations, anything connected to Margaret. Hours passed. Then, just before closing, Emily found something, a small article from 47 years ago. She read the headline, and her heart stopped. Asterisk, young woman injured in road accident outside London. Asterisk. Emily read the name. Margaret Wilson. She stared at the screen. The article said Margaret had survived, but there was something else, something Arthur had never known. Margaret had not disappeared willingly. She had been taken to hospital. And the next morning. She had asked for one person, Arthur. Emily couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, she ran to the bus stop. Arthur was already sitting there. Arthur. The old man looked surprised. Emily. She sat beside him, breathing heavily. I found something. Arthur's face changed. What? About Margaret. His hands began to shake. Emily carefully explained what she had discovered. The accident, the hospital, the newspaper article. Arthur stared at her. You're sure? Emily nodded. Her name was Margaret Wilson. Arthur's eyes filled with tears. She was alive. Yes. Arthur covered his face with both hands. For several moments, he couldn't speak. Then he whispered something. What did she say? Emily looked at him. When she woke up in hospital, she asked for you. Arthur's entire body trembled. What happened? The article says she had a head injury. She was confused. She kept asking the nurses to contact her husband. But why didn't anyone contact me? Emily didn't know. She returned to the library. Together, they searched through old records. Days passed. Then weeks. Finally, Emily found the answer. Margaret had been transferred to another hospital. Her belongings had been lost. Her identification had been damaged. And the hospital had recorded her surname incorrectly. The letters Arthur had sent were never delivered. It was a terrible chain of mistakes. Two people had spent 47 years believing the other had chosen to leave, but the truth was much worse. Neither of them had left. Life had simply separated them. Emily found another record, a marriage certificate. Then an address. Margaret had eventually moved to a small coastal town in northern England. She had never remarried. Emily stared at the information. Arthur. The old man looked at her. Margaret may still be alive. Arthur stopped breathing for a moment. Where? Emily showed him the address. His hands began to shake. How old would she be now? 80. Arthur laughed through his tears. 80. He looked down at his old shoes. Then toward the road. For the first time in 47 years. He stood up from the bench. Emily smiled. Where are you going? Arthur looked at the approaching bus. To find my wife. Emily's smile disappeared. Arthur, wait. He turned. Emily looked worried. What if she doesn't want to see you? Arthur thought about it. Then he smiled sadly. Then I'll finally know. The bus stopped. The doors opened. Arthur stepped inside, for the first time. The journey took nearly 5 hours. Arthur sat beside the window. He didn't say much. He simply held Margaret's photograph in his hands. Emily sat next to him. As the bus traveled north, the landscape slowly changed. The busy streets disappeared. Then came fields. Villages. And finally, the sea. Arthur looked nervous. What if she's forgotten me? Emily smiled. How could she forget you after all this time? Arthur looked at the photograph. I wish I had gone after her. Emily said nothing. I wish I had told her I loved her. You did. Not enough. The bus finally arrived in the coastal town. Emily and Arthur walked slowly through the quiet streets. They found the address. A small white house stood at the end of a narrow lane. There were flowers in the front garden. Arthur stopped. He stared at the house. She's here. Emily looked at him. Are you ready? Arthur shook his head. No. Emily smiled. Then let's knock. Arthur slowly walked to the door. His hand trembled as he raised it. He knocked. Nothing happened. He knocked again. Still nothing. Arthur's face fell. Then they heard footsteps. The door opened. An elderly woman stood there. She had silver hair, a blue cardigan, and tired eyes. She looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at her. For several seconds, neither moved. Emily held her breath. The woman's eyes suddenly widened. Her hand moved to her mouth. Arthur. The old man's face collapsed. Margaret. The woman began to cry. Arthur took one step forward. Then another. Margaret held onto the doorframe. I thought you hated me. Arthur shook his head. I thought you left me. I waited for you. I waited for you, too. Margaret began sobbing. Arthur reached for her hand, and after 47 years, their fingers finally touched. Emily quietly stepped away. She gave them privacy, but before she left, she heard Margaret whisper something that would stay with her forever. I came back, Arthur cried. I know. No, Margaret said. I came back to the bus stop. Arthur looked at her. What? Margaret wiped her tears. After the accident. Months later. I came back to our town. Arthur stared at her. I waited for you. Arthur couldn't speak. Margaret invited them inside. The house was warm and quiet. On the wall were photographs, a young Margaret. An older Margaret. But there was something else. A photograph of Arthur. Emily noticed it immediately. You kept his picture. Margaret smiled. Every day. Arthur sat down. His eyes moved around the room. You knew where I was. Margaret shook her head. No. Then why didn't you find me? I tried. Margaret explained that after the accident, she had suffered memory problems. When she finally remembered Arthur, she returned to their old town, but Arthur wasn't there. She asked neighbors. She asked at the bus station. Nobody knew where he had gone. Eventually, she believed Arthur had moved on. Then I stopped looking. Arthur lowered his head. I never moved on. Margaret reached for his hand. I know. They sat together in silence. 47 years. To people. 1. Misunderstanding, and an entire lifetime lost. Emily watched them. She wondered how many people in the world were separated by things that could have been solved with one honest conversation. Before leaving, Emily asked Margaret a question. Why did you never marry again? Margaret smiled. Because I was already married. Emily looked at Arthur. Margaret laughed softly, even if he didn't know it. Arthur smiled. For the first time, Emily saw peace on his face. The next morning, Arthur didn't go to the old bus stop. Neither did he go the morning after. For the first time in 3 years, the bench was empty. People in the town noticed. The shopkeeper noticed. The bus driver noticed. Everyone wondered where the old man had gone. Then, one morning, Emily saw Arthur again. He was sitting at the bus stop, but this time, he wasn't alone. Margaret sat beside him. She was holding his hand. The bus arrived. The driver opened the doors. Arthur looked at Margaret. Shall we? Margaret smiled. Where are we going? Arthur stood up. Anywhere. They boarded the bus together. Emily watched through the window. As the bus pulled away, Arthur looked back. He smiled at Emily, and she understood. Sometimes, waiting isn't about wasting time. Sometimes, waiting is about believing that the person you love is still trying to find their way home. Years later, Emily still remembered Arthur and Margaret. She often thought about that old bus stop. The wooden bench, the quiet road. And the old man who had waited there every morning. Arthur and Margaret spent the final years of their lives together. They traveled. They visited places they had once dreamed about. They walked beside the sea. They drank tea in little cafes. And every Christmas, they returned to the town where their story had begun. They never forgot the 47 years they had lost, but they also never wasted another day. One winter morning, Emily received a letter. It was from Margaret. Inside was a photograph. Arthur and Margaret were sitting together on the same old bus stop bench, but this time, they were smiling. On the back of the photograph, Margaret had written, ***, we waited long enough. ***, Emily kept that photograph for the rest of her life. And whenever she passed that bus stop, she thought about them. She thought about how easily people can misunderstand one another, how pride can turn into regret, how one unanswered question can become a lifetime of silence. And how sometimes the person you think has abandoned you may have been waiting for you to. So if there's someone you love. Someone you've been too proud to call. Someone you've been waiting for. Don't wait forever. Pick up the phone. Knock on the door. Take the bus. Because life doesn't always give us 47 years to find our way back to each other. And sometimes, the saddest story isn't about the people who stopped loving each other. It's about the people who never stopped. But simply waited too long to say it. And somewhere, in a quiet English town, an old wooden bench still sits beside a road. Every morning, the buses come and go. People hurry past, but for many years, an old man waited there. not because he didn't know where to go, but because he knew exactly where his heart belonged. And finally, after 47 years, he went home.